Every great detective needs a great sidekick. And in today's episode of Mystery Trope Talk, we are going to be talking about the role of the Watson figure in classic and modern detective stories. Hi, my name is Jackie, and this is part of my series Mystery Trope Talk, where I, a mystery author, talk about classic mystery tropes, including their history, why they work, and how to write your own. The Watson trope in mystery novels, of course, comes from Dr. Watson, the famous sidekick of Sherlock Holmes in the Sherlock Holmes stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In the very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, Dr. Watson has returned to London after serving in Afghanistan, and he is looking for a roommate. He ends up meeting Sherlock Holmes, an eccentric and sometimes difficult genius private detective, and the two of them end up living together with Dr. Watson assisting Holmes in his cases. With his Sherlock Holmes stories, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle not only created this genius but eccentric detective archetype, but he also created the detective duo, or at the very least, popularized it. Throughout the golden age of crime fiction, many popular authors tried to copy this formula by having sidekicks for their detective main characters. Think Poirot and Hastings, etc. The Watson figure quickly became a staple of classic detective fiction. In her novel A Man Lay Dead, the first book featuring the character of Albert Campion, Nio Marsh quipped, "Every sleuth ought to have a tame half-wit to make him feel clever." In addition to just being funny, this line shows that the sleuth sidekick dynamic was well established at this point. Additionally, the classic detective author Ronald Knox specifically mentions the Watson figure in his rules for writing detective fiction. There is an entire rule on this list surrounding the Watson figure, and it goes like this. The stupid friend of the detective, the Watson, must not conceal any thoughts which pass through his mind. His intelligence must be slightly, but very slightly, below that of the average reader. Now, there are a couple things to unpack here. I think the most obvious thing that stands out is that Knox refers to the Watson figure as the detective's, quote, stupid friend. Which is harsh. I mean, for all his flaws, Watson is a doctor, so he's not a total dummy. However, I think what Knox is trying to get at here is that the role of the Watson is important because it is helping the reader with their understanding of the story. The key is not to make the Watson a complete and total idiot, but make him slightly less intelligent than your reader. The Watson is not supposed to know everything. He is not supposed to pick up on all the clues that our brilliant sleuth is. And so by having the Watson be one step behind, you are using him as an effective storytelling device. And another important thing about Knox's rule is that the Watson, as the narrator of the story, should not conceal any of the thoughts that pass through his mind. And this highlights the Watson's pivotal role as the person who shapes the reader's understanding of the mystery. Focus less on making the Watson dumb and more so treating the Watson as a vehicle for the reader. Which brings us nicely to our next point. What exactly is the Watson's purpose in a detective story? Whether you're reading a story from Victorian London or a modern reboot, the Watson does more than merely follow the sleuth around. The Watson shapes the story, anchors the reader, and yes, sometimes makes the detective appear smarter. The Watson's character's first function is to frequently serve as a narrator or viewpoint character in the story. When you think of characters like Dr. Watson or Captain Hastings, they almost always narrate the stories that they appear in. They are the friends of the genius detective, and the stories are written with a framing device. The Watson, the Hastings, is writing down a true account of things they actually experience while assisting this genius. Thus, the reader is experiencing the story through that character's perspective and limited to only what the sidekick knew at that time. If we were reading a mystery where Holmes or Poirot was the narrator, the mystery would not be as mysterious. When you read things like Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot, frequently Holmes or Poirot will point out a clue, and Watson or Hastings, as the narrator, will not understand what this clue is meant to signify. If we were following the detective as the narrator, the story would be a little more boring because we would have all of the pieces and know exactly what they mean. However, the sidekick as the narrator filters what we see, so we, the reader, are able to have the clues and play along, but be able to piece out some of the mystery ourselves, since the narrator doesn't know everything. And number two, the sidekick is effectively the surrogate for the reader in the story. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, basically, the sidekick in the story is there to ask the questions that we, the reader, would want to ask if we were following the detective. The sidekick is confused when we're confused. They're curious when we're curious. And when our genius but eccentric detective starts rambling about rare poisons or what the cigarette ash on the carpet signifies, the sidekick is there to say, wait, can you explain, please? The sidekick is there to ask questions and give the main character someone to bounce ideas off of. Point number three, the Watson figure can serve as a foil to our main detective and also be a more humanizing influence. It is a fact that Sherlock Holmes is an absolutely brilliant detective. However, if you read the original stories, he can also be, well, to be frank, a jerk. Holmes is addicted to drugs, he can be misogynistic, his life pretty much centers around his detection. On the other hand, Dr. Watson, though not quite as intelligent as Holmes, is much more genial. He's much friendlier and understands societal cues much more than Holmes does. And though friendship or romance are not priorities in Holmes's life, it does seem like he generally cares about Watson as his friend and sidekick. And that makes his character more likable because it gives him a person that he does care about. Think also about Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings in the Poirot series by Agatha Christie. Poirot is a genius, but he is also quite eccentric and fastidious. He's obsessed with tending to his luxuriant mustache. He needs his eggs for breakfast to be exactly the same size. Poirot does have friends in the series, though again, like Holmes, he really displays no interest in romantic or sexual relationships. His life centers on his career as a private detective. But let's take a look at Arthur Hastings, who is his sidekick in several Poirot books. Like Watson, Hastings had a career in the military where he was decently successful. He does end up finding love and getting married, raising children with his wife. And while Hastings can be rather dense, he does have a lot of friends, has a seemingly successful personal life, and really represents the everyman character in the Poirot stories. He's just an ordinary British man from this time period. I mean, well, maybe not every man. He's not working in a factory or anything like that. He's tagging along with a private detective, but you understand my point, right? Someone like Watson or Hastings is much more quote unquote normal than the eccentric detective. And that's on purpose. The two of them play off each other. Holmes and Poirot also become more likable due to their devotion to their sidekicks. The detective brings the brilliance. The sidekick brings the human element to the story. They can also sometimes end up assisting the detectives with their understanding of social cues. Another role that a sidekick can serve in a detective story is being comedic relief. Think about Hastings and the running gag in the Poirot stories about how Hastings always falls for the charm of a beautiful woman, especially if she's a redhead. Hastings loves redheads. Thus, Hastings frequently ends up being the butt of the joke in the Poirot stories, and that's one of the reasons that I actually love Hastings as a character. Christie is very successful at building laughs at Hastings' expense. Another way that Hastings serves as comedic relief is he often overestimates his own abilities and underestimates Poirot's abilities, which creates great dramatic irony in his narration. Because while Hastings is thinking about how kooky Poirot is, he himself actually has no idea what's going on. This contrast between the detective and the sidekick makes the story funny and adds rhythm to it. You really can build a sidekick in a story to add some levity to the mystery plotline. So now that you know the role the Watson or sidekick serves in the story, let's talk about how you build a successful sidekick in your own tales. But first, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to give it a like, let me know your favorite detective sidekick in the comments, and subscribe to see the next episode of Mystery Trope Talk when it comes out. My first tip for writing a successful detective sidekick is to make them more than a mere mouthpiece. Asking questions is an important part of your sidekick's role. However, they should also have their own life and interests outside of working with the detective. Think about somebody like Dr. Watson, who has a medical career, a past in the military, later on, a wife and children. It's also important to remember that your sidekick should have his or her own code of ethics that they're going to follow while they're investigating these mysteries. They should not be willing to just follow the detective at any cost. They should still have their own beliefs and rooting interest in the events of the narrative. Number two, your sidekick should still have their own smarts, just not in the same way that the detective has their smarts. If we go back to Ronald Knox's rule describing the Watson figure as stupid, I think that stupid is not necessarily the best word. I think that they should be not as good at detection, but they should still have their own skills that give them a reason to be in the story. The Watsons should not out-detective the detective, but they should still be able to help the detective in some way. Perhaps they're more emotionally intelligent, good with people. Maybe they're the muscle that helps your detective chase down bad guys. Perhaps they're more persuasive, better at socializing, or maybe they notice clues the detective doesn't, not because they're smarter, but just because they look at the world differently. Sometimes in the Poirot stories, Hastings makes an offhand comment that sparks an idea in Poirot, helping Poirot solve the mystery, but Hastings isn't even aware of what it is that he said. Another great thing that you can do with your sidekick is give them access to things that your sleuth can't access. For a great example of this, look at the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries by Dorothy L. Sayers. In this series, her gentleman sleuth is sometimes assisted by his servant, Bunter. Now, the good thing about this is that Bunter is able to interview people that wouldn't talk to Lord Peter. Because Lord Peter is the son of a duke, he inhabits the upstairs world, the world of the aristocrats. Bunter, on the other hand, can go talk to other servants and find out information from them that he can then bring back to Lord Peter. That makes him an extremely useful sidekick because he walks in a world that Lord Peter doesn't belong to, and vice versa. Tip number 3 for writing your sidekick is that you can use them to control information. Remember, the Watson is the reader's viewpoint character in this world, and so thus, you can really use them as a storytelling tool to control what your reader knows and when. If we were inside the head of the detective, it could take away some of the mystery. But if you want to make your sidekick the viewpoint character or the anchor character in that world, you can keep your reader in the dark. When your detective discovers a strange clue, but your sidekick doesn't know what it means, you're telling the reader the clue, but giving them the space to puzzle it out themselves. Perhaps your sleuth comes up with a genius plan to catch the killer, but doesn't tell the sidekick who they think the killer is. That way, since your sidekick doesn't know, your reader can still be kept in suspense. You can also use the sidekick as a tool for misdirection because perhaps they see a clue and interpret it entirely wrong. That may redirect the reader's focus to the wrong area and make it more surprising for them when the sleuth reveals, hey sidekick, you were totally wrong about this. This is what it actually means. moments. And to go back to the point that Ronald Knox was trying to make with his rules for detective fiction, this is extremely satisfying because since your sidekick guessed wrong, your reader gets to feel very proud of themselves at the end when they realize they were one step ahead of the Watson. Tip number 4 is to make sure that there is real chemistry between your detective and your sidekick. If you were reading the Sherlock Holmes stories and Holmes did not care at all for Watson, it would make the stories less enjoyable. Holmes's care for Watson humanizes him and makes their relationship more interesting. Think about it. Your sidekick has chosen to stick by this detective, even potentially walking into danger with them time and time again. You don't risk your life and safety for just anyone. There has to be a real connection between the two characters. You can have fun playing with this relationship dynamic. It could be a close relationship between master and servant, like we see between Lord Peter and Bunter. It could be a Holmes, Watson, or Poirot Hastings relationship where the sidekick views the detective as a friend, and the detective does view them as a friend too, even if they don't always show it or say it out loud. You could also do a story where the detective and their sidekick are a romantically involved pair. Think about the later Lord Peter mysteries where he's often assisted by his love interest, Harriet Vane. They could be best friends, lovers. They could be people who seem like they just have a business relationship, but the detective does care about the sidekick deep down. You could have them have witty repartee or hilarious exchanges. The most important thing is establishing why your sidekick matters to your detective. This makes the detective more likable, establishes your sidekick's motivation for sticking by the detective through thick and thin, and it can also create great drama throughout your story. Say, for instance, if the bad guy threatens or kidnaps the sidekick, what will your detective do to get them back? You've got to make readers feel that special connection between the Watson and the detective. Make it an important heart for the story. And tip number 5 for writing a sidekick is the sidekick should ask questions and occasionally push back. If your detective is being vague or saying things the sidekick doesn't understand, they're probably not going to go along with it without questions, even though they do trust the detective. The Watson figure should ask for details. They need to make the detective justify their logic. Think about what questions your reader might be having during this scene and have the Watson figure vocalize those questions. Your sidekick also needs to feel like a real human, and that means they need to have real human emotions. Sometimes they should get angry with the detective, feel like the detective has gone too far or taken too great a risk. The Watson should make mistakes, get things wrong, be worried for their friend. Rather than merely following the detective along unquestioningly, they should challenge that character and establish a repartee. That way, you can use your sidekick to add more emotion or tension to your story and create a truly memorable duo. If you made it through to the end of this video, drop your favorite emoji in the comment section down below and let me know who is your favorite detective sidekick. If you'd like to watch another episode of Mystery Trope Talk, I recommend this one. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Goodbye!